cold didn't just make World War soldiers uncomfortable. It killed them. Frostbite, hypothermia, trench foot and exhaustion took more men out of action than bullets in some winters. And here's the part most history books skip. Soldiers didn't survive frozen bunks and trenches because they were tougher. They survived because they learned how to bend heat itself, using nothing more than walls. That's the secret. Not bigger fires, not better coats. A simple wall trick that could take the heat they already had and multiply its effect, sometimes making a shelter feel 3 times warmer without adding fuel. It sounds almost too clever for the conditions they were fighting in. But it worked. And it worked well enough to spread quietly across battlefields from the Western Front to the Eastern Front and into World War II. This wasn't theory, it was survival. Why heat mattered more than firepower in winter warfare? Once temperatures dropped below freezing, soldiers entered a second war, one against the environment. Wet uniforms froze solid overnight. Metal weapons burned bare skin. Even breathing felt sharp. Fires were dangerous because smoke attracted artillery and snipers. Fuel was scarce, and exposed flames wasted heat into open air. Soldiers needed warmth without visibility. They needed efficiency, not comfort. And, well, they needed it fast. The biggest mistake inexperienced troops made was assuming heat came from fire alone. Veterans learned something different. Heat wasn't just about creating warmth. It was about trapping it, reflecting it, and, forcing it to stay where bodies actually were. That realization changed everything. The wall trick, well, that was something soldiers learned the hard way. The trick itself was deceptively simple. Soldiers would build or modify walls inside bunkers, dugouts or trench shelters to act as heat reflectors. Now, these weren't structural walls meant to stop bullets or anything like that. They were what you'd call thermal walls, placed behind or beside sleeping men, fires, candles, or even just body heat. Instead of letting warmth just disappear into the frozen earth or out into the open air, these walls, well, they bounced it right back. Materials, they varied quite a bit. Sometimes it was packed earth. Other times, wood planks, sandbags, or even snow blocks. Every now and then, scavenged metal sheets, if those were available. The key wasn't really what the wall was made of, honestly. It was all about where it was placed and, just as important, how it was shaped. By positioning a wall behind a heat source, or, behind sleeping soldiers, warmth that would normally be absorbed by the cold ground or just lost into the shelter was actually redirected back toward their bodies. Soldiers weren't creating more heat, they were recycling it. Heat moves in pretty predictable ways. In cold environments, it just flows rapidly toward anything colder. Frozen ground acts kind of like a sponge, sucking warmth right out of the body. That's why, honestly, sleeping directly on the earth is so dangerous. By placing a dense wall behind them, soldiers slowed that heat loss. Dense materials like packed soil or sandbags absorbed warmth slowly, then released it back into the space. This created a crude but, well, effective thermal battery. When a small flame was involved, even just a candle, the effect became dramatic. A single candle produces very little heat. On its own, it barely helps. But place a reflective wall behind it, especially one that's curved inward, and suddenly that weak heat radiates forward instead of dispersing uselessly. Reports from both world wars mention dugouts, where a single candle and a properly placed wall made the difference between numb misery and functional warmth. This is where the so-called tripling effect comes from. Soldiers didn't measure temperature scientifically. They measured it by survival. And time and again they noticed that shelters with proper heat reflection stayed warm far longer than those without. One of the most counterintuitive versions of this trick involved snow. Snow feels cold, but, compacted snow is actually an excellent insulator. Soldiers fighting in winter conditions, especially over in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, learned to build interior snow walls inside dugouts or even lean-to shelters. These walls reflected body heat back inward while also blocking wind and radiant heat loss. A snow wall behind sleeping soldiers could, honestly, raise perceived warmth dramatically, even when outside temperatures were just brutal. This wasn't folklore. Military manuals later acknowledged snow's insulating properties, but frontline troops figured it out first, often by accident and often while desperate. In some areas, soldiers scavenged corrugated metal, tin roofing, or even vehicle parts. When placed behind a small fire or candle, metal reflected radiant heat forward almost instantly. The danger was overheating or carbon monoxide buildup, so ventilation mattered. But when done correctly, a metal-backed wall turned weak heat into focused warmth. This trick showed up in improvised bunkers, collapsed buildings, and abandoned farmhouses. Anywhere soldiers could shape space, they used it. There's another layer most people miss. Warmth isn't just physical, it's mental. Soldiers who felt warmer slept better, slept longer, made fewer mistakes, maintained morale. A reflective wall didn't just save calories and fuel, it saved willpower. Veterans wrote about how a properly arranged shelter felt alive, like it held heat instead of bleeding it away. That sense of control mattered in environments where everything else felt hostile. Once central heating, synthetic insulation, and portable heaters became common, this kind of thinking, it just faded away. These days, modern survival focuses more on gear than on geometry. But, geometry is timeless. The soldiers weren't using advanced technology. They were relying on physics, intuition, and really necessity. And those rules, they haven't changed. Whether you're camping in cold weather, building an emergency shelter, or dealing with power outages, the same principle applies. Heat you already have is more valuable than heat you try to create. A wall behind you matters. The ground beneath you matters. The shape of your space matters. This isn't about reenacting history. It's about remembering what worked when nothing else was available. Here's the interesting part. Every modern survival shelter that works well uses this same idea. Reflective blankets, insulated panels, windbreaks. They're all descendants of that simple wall trick soldiers used in frozen trenches. You know, they just forgot to tell the story. World War soldiers didn't survive winter because they were lucky. They survived because they paid attention. They noticed patterns. They experimented quietly. And when something worked, they shared it without ceremony. The wall trick wasn't glamorous. It didn't win medals, but it saved lives night after night in places where the cold was just as dangerous as the enemy. And that's really the heart of survival history. Not heroics, ingenuity. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten skills that kept people alive long before modern convenience, well, you're in the right place. Like the video, share it with someone who loves real survival knowledge, and subscribe to Legacy of Survival for more true stories pulled straight from history's edge. There's a lot more wisdom buried out there, and honestly, we're just getting started.